They called me the Clueless Groom for 8 months, behind my back, mostly, but sometimes right to my face, like it was a compliment. My future mother-in-law used to say it with a little laugh. He's so sweet, he has no idea what's going on. And everyone at the table would smile the way you smile at a dog that just fetched the wrong stick. I let them believe it. I let them spend $120,000 planning a wedding around a groom they thought didn't understand a single thing that was happening to him. They were wrong about that. I understood everything. I understood it 11 months before the wedding, and I spent every one of those months letting them build something I already knew I was going to walk into and take apart, piece by piece, in front of everyone they'd invited to watch. This is the story of how a joke about my intelligence turned into the most expensive mistake 3 people ever made. And I promise you, the moment where it all comes apart is not what you're expecting. So stay with me, because I'm going to walk you through exactly how it happened, in the order it happened, so you understand why nobody in that room saw it coming. Part 1. How I became the clueless one. I met her, I'll call her M, at a mutual friend's dinner party 2 years before any of this happened. She was sharp, funny, the kind of person who finishes other people's sentences correctly. I fell for her fast, and I wasn't embarrassed about that. Some people are worth falling for fast. Her family was close, tight-knit in the way that looks lovely from the outside and feels a little suffocating once you're actually inside it. Her mother, I'll call her D, ran that family the way some people run a business, warmly but with a very clear sense of who was useful and who wasn't. I was, from the beginning, filed under not particularly useful. I worked in a field that didn't sound impressive at dinner parties. I didn't come from money. I was polite, a little quiet in big groups, and I asked a lot of questions about things other people assumed I already understood. That last part is the one that matters most, so hold on to it. Because what M's family read as confusion, I actually understood as something else entirely. I was learning how they thought. Every question I asked that made someone smirk and explain something slowly, like I was a child. I was actually mapping out exactly how this family operated, what they valued, and where the cracks were. They thought I was slow. I was taking notes. Part 2. The comment that changed everything about 14 months before the wedding. I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come back into the kitchen for a forgotten phone charger, and M's mother was on the phone with her sister, laughing about something. He genuinely has no idea, she said. M could tell him the sky was green, and he'd nod along. It's actually kind of perfect, honestly. Easiest son-in-law I'll ever have. Whatever we want, he'll just go along with it. I stood in that doorway for maybe 4 seconds, long enough to hear the whole sentence, long enough to understand something I hadn't fully let myself understand before. This wasn't affectionate teasing. This was a plan. I was being selected, evaluated, really, for how easy I'd be to manage. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder and more useful than anger. It was clarity. I walked back into the kitchen a few seconds later, charger in hand, smiling the same way I always smiled. I said something forgettable. I left. And from that night forward, I made a decision that I never once mentioned to another living person for the next 14 months. I was going to let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about me, for exactly as long as it took. Building the stage. Here's where most people expect a story like this to jump straight to the wedding day. It doesn't, because the wedding day only worked because of what happened in the 11 months before it. And that part is honestly the part I'm most proud of. M's family loved planning, loved it in a way that went past normal wedding excitement into something closer to a production. Her mother took over almost every decision, venue, guest list, seating charts down to the inch. And every time a decision came up, I nodded, agreed, and said some version of, "You all know best. I just want M to be happy." Every single time. They believed that sentence completely. And because they believed it completely, they never once thought to hide anything from me. Financial decisions were discussed openly in front of me, because why wouldn't they be? I clearly wasn't paying attention, wasn't tracking anything, wasn't going to remember any of it. I remembered every single dollar. The venue cost $42,000, a private estate 2 hours outside the city that M's mother had wanted for years and had apparently mentioned when the right daughter finally got married, more times than M was comfortable admitting. The catering, the open bar, the string quartet, the videographer who flew in from another state. By the time the final tally came together, it landed just north of $120,000, most of it paid by M's parents, as, in her mother's words, an investment in the family's reputation. I let every dollar of that get spent, not because I wanted to punish M for her mother's cruelty. I want to be very clear about that distinction, because it matters for how this story ends. I let it get spent because the amount of money on the table was, itself, going to be part of the point I was making. A small, quiet correction wouldn't have landed the same way. It needed to be big enough that nobody in that room could pretend afterward that it hadn't happened. Part 4. The detail nobody else noticed. Here's the part of the story that even people close to me still don't fully understand, and it's the piece that made everything else possible. Weddings, especially expensive ones, generate an enormous amount of paperwork. Vendor contracts, deposit schedules, cancellation clauses, insurance riders. Almost none of it gets read carefully by anyone except whoever's name is actually on the contracts. In this case, that was me. Not because I insisted on it, because nobody else wanted the administrative work, and let the clueless groom handle the boring paperwork was, ironically, exactly the kind of task they assumed I'd be too disorganized to mess up and too unimportant to matter. So for 11 months, every vendor contract for that wedding had my name on it, my signature on it, and, critically, my ability to modify or cancel it right up until a window that closed exactly 72 hours before the ceremony. I didn't cancel anything. I want to be clear about that too, because the version of this story where I burned the wedding down financially isn't the version that happened, and it's not the version I'm proud of. What I did instead was quieter, and it took much longer to set up, and it didn't reveal itself until the exact moment I wanted it to. Part 5. What was actually happening the whole time. While everyone believed I was cheerfully clueless, I was doing 3 specific things, patiently, over 11 months. First, I was documenting every comment, every dismissive laugh, every moment M's mother made a decision about my own wedding without consulting me, and then explained it to me slowly afterward, like I wouldn't have understood the reasoning. I wasn't collecting this out of spite. I was collecting it because I intended, at some point, for the family to hear their own words played back to them, in order so there could be no argument about tone or context or, "You're remembering it wrong." Second, I was quietly building a relationship with M that had nothing to do with her family. This is the part that actually matters most, and it's the part I think gets lost in stories like this. M was not part of what her mother was doing. She loved me, genuinely, and she had no idea her mother had ever said the things I'd overheard. Part of what I was doing those 11 months wasn't preparing to punish a family. It was making absolutely sure that whatever happened next wouldn't cost me the one person in that entire family who had never treated me the way her mother had. Third, and this is the detail almost nobody guesses, I was preparing the vows. Not my vows to M. The moment inside the ceremony itself, right after the vows, where tradition at their family's weddings called for the groom to say a few words of thanks to the family who'd hosted and funded the event. It was expected. Every wedding in that family, going back 2 generations, included this exact moment, a toast of gratitude to the parents delivered by the groom in front of every guest. They expected a clueless groom to stumble through a sweet, forgettable thank you. I had spent 11 months writing something else entirely. Part 6. The day itself. The morning of the wedding, M's mother pulled me aside and said, laughing, "Don't forget to thank us properly today. I had someone specifically ask if you'd even remember to do it." Even on the day itself, the joke never stopped. I smiled, thanked her for everything, and told her I'd been thinking about exactly what to say for a long time. That part, at least, was completely true. The ceremony went the way ceremonies go. Vows, rings, the officiant's closing words. And then came the moment. The toast. 240 guests, string quartet quiet in the corner, M's mother beaming in the front row, already reaching for her champagne glass in anticipation of the sweet, simple thank you she expected. I want you to understand something about what I said next, because I've thought about this moment for years since, and I still believe it was the right choice, even though it wasn't a gentle one. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I thanked M's family sincerely for the wedding itself, the venue, the effort, the money. And then I said I wanted to share something I'd learned about this family over the past 2 years, because I thought it deserved to be said publicly, the same way their generosity had been shown publicly. I told the story of the comment I'd overheard in the kitchen 14 months earlier, every word of it, exactly as I'd heard it, without embellishment, because it didn't need embellishment. I told 240 guests that I had known for over a year that I was being treated as an easy, manageable son-in-law rather than a person, and that I had let that continue quietly because I wanted the truth to come out on a day big enough that it couldn't be minimized or explained away afterward. Then I turned to M, took her hand, and told her, only her in that moment, that none of what I just said was about her, that she had never once treated me the way her mother had, and that everything I felt for her was completely separate from everything I just said about the rest of the room. Part 7. What happened after I'm not going to pretend the reception continued normally after that. It didn't. There was a long, heavy silence, then a lot of quiet conversation in small clusters. Then, within about 20 minutes, a version of the event resuming, because 240 people who've already paid for a caterer tend to eventually sit back down and eat dinner, even after something like that happens in the middle of it. M's mother did not speak to me again that day. She barely spoke to me for the following year. What surprised me most wasn't her anger. I'd expected that completely. What surprised me was that several members of the extended family quietly approached me over the following weeks to tell me they'd heard her say similar things about other people in the family for years, and that something about hearing it said out loud in that room on that day had actually changed how they saw her, not how they saw me. Em and I talked for a long time that night after everyone left. She was upset, not at what I'd said was true, but that I'd carried it alone for over a year without telling her. That conversation was harder than the toast itself, honestly, and it's the part of this story I think about more than any other. I told her I hadn't kept it from her to manipulate anything between us. I'd kept it from her because I didn't want her to spend the entire engagement caught between defending her mother and defending me. I wanted her to find out the same way everyone else did, without me putting her in the middle of it beforehand. She forgave me. It took time, and it wasn't instant, and I don't think it should have been instant. I'd made a decision that affected her too, without her input, and I understood why that stung, even though my intentions toward her had never been anything but protective. Part 8. Where we are now. We're still married, 4 years now. Her mother and I have a relationship today that I describe as cautious, functional, and honest, which, frankly, is more than we had before any of this happened, because at least now there's no pretending underneath it. I think about that 11-month stretch often, and I want to be honest about something most stories like this don't admit. I don't think what I did was purely noble. Watching someone spend 6 figures on an event while I quietly planned to detonate a piece of it wasn't entirely fair to everyone in that room. Even the people who hadn't earned my anger. There were guests that day who didn't deserve to have their afternoon turned into someone else's reckoning. I've made peace with that cost, but I don't pretend it wasn't a cost. What I'd tell anyone in a similar position isn't do exactly what I did. It's this. Being underestimated is not always something to fight in the moment it happens. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do with being underestimated is let it run its course a little longer than feels comfortable. Document it honestly, and choose a moment to correct it that can't be quietly erased or explained away afterward. I got the woman I loved. I got a family that finally saw me clearly, even if it took a wedding-sized correction to get there. And I got something else I didn't expect going into that day. I got to watch a room full of people who thought they understood exactly who I was, realize all at once that they never had. If you want to know what happened at the rehearsal dinner the night before, because there's a piece of that night I haven't told you yet, and it's the reason I knew, walking into that ceremony, that I wasn't going to change my mind, that's a story for next time.